3, 1, 2, 3. Okay, seems better, right? Grateful for a chance to give a talk. And my topic would be cost-effective testing with Storybook and Playwright in Vue applications. And I'm not super well known, so I have to throw a couple of facts about myself. So I've been doing development for quite a while already, like 10 years, and participated in different roles, like in 30-ish front-end projects. I think all of them are on Vue, so relevant. I also have like 7 years of Storybook fanboying, story fanboying. Started using very early. I'm also CTO at Epic Max, but we are a small company, so I'm not like a super management guy. I'm more like technical person, doing a lot of like audits, estimates, stuff like that. I'm also creator and lead developer of Vue2QI and Vue2Admin, which are open source UI framework and UI template. And I will base my examples on Vue2QI. I will use it as a big playground, basically. Right. So I want to cover a couple of topics. First, I will share my story, like how I got into story testing, what was like the main value for me. Then we'll have a small live coding session, like I will showcase like how easy it is to use, maybe. So you'll be motivated to use it in your project, hopefully. Then we will talk about how you can maximize cost to value, and that would also imply like negotiating with your maybe team members or like management, how you can give them some numbers so they'll be more motivated to use it. And I will also talk a bit about team integration and aligning with business goals. So my goal is that by the end of the talk, you'll have a strategy for cheap but effective testing for your front-end projects. Okay, so first, when I started doing development, it was a small project. It was a small team, like maybe 4 people. And I tried to get some confidence with testing. I tried different approaches, and one of them is manual testing, and I found manual testing is a bit too slow and time-consuming, and also you have to be very attentive because you can make an error, and attention is a like very valuable resource for developer. It's also pretty hard to scale, so as application grows, you found yourself in a situation where you can actually manual test like only a couple of areas. And testing everything takes eternity. I had some troubles with unit testing as well, as it was a bit detached from user and UI stories. And like generally, what created most troubles is if like some flows in the application didn't work, and it was hard to test it with a unit test. It was also a bit complex, so like you try some unit test, you come back in like 3 months, and you don't remember how it works at all. And doing high coverage was also like a bit expensive for our team at least. E2E had different set of troubles. We had flakiness, false positives. So like the more tests you have, the more of them break on every change, or like seems to break. It also takes a lot of work, and it's painfully slow and decent coverage. And I'm not saying any of these approaches are actually bad. It's just that they didn't work particularly for me, or they didn't feel right. And yeah, so I decided to do what developers often do, and I built my own library. It's called Vuebook. Please don't use it. I will tell you why in a bit. And what this library allowed to do is, like, let's say you have an application, and you have a button on the right, and what you want to do is to have this button in like a container and try and go through all its cases, and be able to develop maybe in that environment. So that's exactly what I did. And that worked fine, yeah, for a time, but at some point, trouble appeared. So my library actually supported only Webpack, and the Vite appeared, and Nuxt used also a bit different environment, and Rollup appeared. So it was tricky to support. It also wasn't that feature-rich. So, and Storybook also became like more compatible with Vue, because in the early years it was a mess, like, dependency-wise. Right now it's pretty perfect. There are some small issues, but very good. So I use this flow with stories in application, and when you do it, basically the two main concepts is that you will develop your components in Zoation with small playground for each use case, and you will use Storybook to gain access to these playgrounds. And this is important because you will have like hundreds, maybe thousands of stories, and navigating via routing or stuff like that is not really doable. So what is cool about stories? So from one perspective, you test manually, right? Same as manual testing. And it also requires attention, limited resource. But you only focus on one component. So like in application testing, if you do manual testing, it's like the more attention you put in, the more return you get. And here it's capped, like at a certain number. And that's great. Oops. All right, some mistake. Sorry. So fast forward to now. We use Storybook a lot. And depending on the project, it's sometimes like manual testing. And for other projects, it's more involved approach where we use interaction tests and visual tests, and sometimes it's used for documentation as well. So like event spread. And I want to do a bit of live coding to show you how it's done. So we will be developing, not developing, we will be covering with stories a rating component. And first off, we would need to create a file with stories. And in stories files, you also need to have export default with Storybook meta. I'm not sure why it's needed, but it has to be there. Meta alone won't suffice, so we have to create a story as well. And we need to add template. Any mistakes? Yeah, I have one. Okay, with that we should have a story, and indeed we do. So we have a story for rating. Let's reload the page. Okay, here's a story. And I have a tricky question. Maybe you can tell me what's wrong about this story. Yeah, it's not clickable. So what we created right now is a default case. And the default case is basically should be something like a basic usage case for a component. And that's clearly not a basic usage case for a component because it's not clickable. And we would expect to be clickable. So even though this looks like a simplest case, it's actually incorrect for a default case. So we need to create a setup and define a state. And pass it via every model. Okay, now it's clickable and it's perfectly decent for a default case. But one more thing about this component is that you have actually to click it to test, which is not great. So imagine you have like hundreds of components like this, and you would expect developers to go and click through all of them. No, not at all. So we have to automate this like clicking procedure. And for that, we would use an interaction test. We would need to somehow to expose a value. So we'll use just a paragraph for that. And, right. Okay, and we'll also need a test, which I will copy because it's too much to type. Cool, so with that we should have an integration test embedded. And this one uses Playwright, so it's pretty powerful. You can also like play with different environments if you need to. But in our case, what it does, it expects value to be here immediately, and then changes, clicks on fourth item, and expects value to be 4, which seems to be correct, our test passes. So one more thing you can do with Storybook is visual tests. And I won't run them there because they're a bit lengthy. And I will just show you how the change would look. So let's say we change from this test from 4 to 5. And in visual test 2, I use chromatic in this case. You will have a difference between two components highlighted. And nice thing about this tool is that it relies on your GitHub, so it knows like which branch it's on, not only on timestamp, so it will be able to tell the commit it should differ from. And one more thing I want to showcase you is when let's say we have a couple of more components, so we'll add a max component, something like this. Max 3. And we will add clearable component. Okay, and with that we have 3 stories. We can interact with them, same as before. But the trick right now becomes that it's, again, hard for developer to just check at a glance if anything is broken. So you have to go through every story, check them one by one. That's not great. So Storybook has a tool to make these simpler. It's called Autodex, and it takes 1 line to add them. Autodex. All right, and we have our documentation. So you can add more stuff here. You can add some text, like some examples, but already you can see it's like easily shows what it has to show. And with that, my small demo is done, and we can continue with main talk. So next topic would be maximizing Storybook value to cost ratio. And I will address a couple of topics. So which functionality should you cover with stories first? And then I will talk about interaction and visual regression test prioritization. And then we will also talk a bit about how do you test composables, because I believe this is also very important to add to stories. So I think the best point to start using stories is files that have high change count. And you can actually figure this out with GitHub changes, Git changes, sorry. And even if this component doesn't look like modular, it could be like 2,000 line big page component, it's still a very good idea to check it and maybe separate it into modular components and then cover these with stories. Then in priority should go modular components and composables. And only then we should cover like pages and widgets, I believe, because these are quite expensive to cover and sometimes even not needed. And like E2E could be done, could do a better job with that. All right, and if we look from different glance, so how do you start? What would be step-by-step guide for using stories? I believe the best thing you can do immediately is to start to set up Storybook and do a test automation. So attach visual tests and attach interaction test with it. And this is important because even if you don't use any interaction test, Storybook testing utility still runs smoke testing for you. Then it's a good idea to create default stories for every component. So you might have a lot of props, but if you create a default component, it's already like maybe 20% of functionality for this component. And it's very cheap. You can also write a script, go through all components in like your UI library and create a story for each one. Works great. And the next step would be to create stories for complex component. And I think we should prioritize complex component because for stories, price is linear, so it grows linearly with the number of props. But for testing, benefit is exponential with the number of props because the more complex component, the easier it will be breaking, and the more point of breakage it will have. And only then, I believe, it's ideal to focus on simple stories and utilities. So how can we use interaction test efficiently? You can use test runner before you wrote first interaction test. I said about this before, sorry. I also think it's sometimes possible to cheat code a bit with the certs because visual testing gives you a good indication on how props behave. So in this case, you can make an assert for warning color, like that it applied, but you can just also use visual test and it says the same. And we have small hints, so like when you go into chromatic interface and you look at the story, you have story name, which tells you which prop is being tested, so it's often enough information for developer to determine whether it's like false positive or actual bug. Now about composables. Sometimes there is a case where you have a number of composables which all use pretty much the same functionality. They may use maybe same props, maybe slightly different props. Let's say this composable functionality is a bit convoluted. So if we test in stories all props for every component, that could create a lot of duplication and a lot of not needed work. So I think we should test in stories for components only if component is connected properly. So in this case, we have one prop and we're testing 3 different things. I believe this is wrong. And instead, we should test only one thing. And in this case, color is a bit convoluted, so it's actually a complicated composable. So, and we can test these color composables separately. We can create a dummy component, create a wrapper for it, and then run it through a bunch of stories, testing all kinds of functionality. So this kind of nice separation, I think, creates a lot of benefit. Now about visual testing, you have 2 options, cloud and on-premise. So free tier is 5,000 screenshots, and like maybe middle-sized Storybook would be about like maybe 300, 500, not sure what your project is, stories. So it won't last for long. But it's still enough to run like a couple of times in a month or so. If you need more screenshots, if you want to integrate it into your pipeline, then it gets a bit more expensive. But there is also a case for open source projects is that you can write to Chromatic or Percy or BrowserStack and ask them for a free plan and get one for free. It includes like, I think, 30,000 screenshots. If you have too many screenshots to cover, then it might be a better idea to invest in on-premise service, which I won't cover how to do that because not much time. Right, so we got 2 bonus points, and we'll cover 2 topics here. So how much would it take, time, money, to add stories to a project? And I hope you can use this with like negotiation of like adding these 2 to a project. And I also tell a bit about what kind of additional benefits with interaction with team Storybook brings to the table. Right, so first step, set up and default stories, I think takes about 1 week, and it's already like 20% efficiency. So this would be a great negotiation point. Like in 1 week, we'll have some results, definitely, because some bearded guy told this on a conference. And in 1 month, you can expect like maybe 10 high priority, complicated components to be done, to be covered fully with stories. And that's like 50% efficiency, what you can get. And in 3 months, you can cover all other components. And I'm basing these on numbers that I have like 110 components in total, so your mileage might vary. And we will also cover CSS utilities, and this will gain us 80% efficiency from stories. Cool. And we will also skip the widgets and pages for now. Maybe for your case, it will be different. But. And please take these numbers with a big grain of salt. So it extremely depends on the project, because like component sizes could like be 10 times different. So, but setup should be about right, I think. Okay. And here the idea is that first week is very cool, very effective, and then it goes down. So, not sure I explained this. Okay. Next, I'll speak about interaction with the team. And this is a bit of a magical thing about Storybook. It's a bit hard to explain. So here I took like the points that were most powerful for me, and I just took one item for every like team group. So for developers, I believe this would be access to quicker production bugs. So you can give a link someone, or you like, okay, here's a bug. You explain it, and let's say I, as a developer, I go and reproduce it very quickly. I generally don't even start working with something if I don't have a reproduction in Storybook. For designers, it's, again, easy time controlling the implementation of design. So they can take more responsibility. They can go to developers and see what they're doing. They're not like one way. And for technical, non-technical stakeholders, they have vision on intermediate development progress. And by that I mean, so let's say you have a big component you're working on, and you're working like maybe 2 months or so, or some period of time. And stakeholders have no real way to know what you're doing, unless you go and like show them what's on your screen. And with Storybook, they can check your intermediate progress and be happy about your current progress. And for QA, it's also like a responsibility sharing. So without Storybook, it feels like you have a kitchen where development happens, and then you have, and then QA people, they can also like test ready dishes. And with Storybook, you're like opening them a door to your cooking station, and they can taste, sample some stuff before it gets to production. Again, just gives them more power. And we have a couple of quick takeaways on this talk, and that would be it. If you feel a need for testing, I believe getting Storybook for a front-end project might cover it cost efficiently. Best idea would be to start to set up a Storybook with interaction and visual tests, then add a story for each component, and then progress from that point. I believe it's a great idea to focus stories on complex modular components first, then simpler modular components and CSS utils. And for as long as you want, avoid to using stories for pages and widgets, because that's very hard to do. And that's it from my side. Thank you for your attention. I hope that was useful.